Hey guys, tonight we traveled deep into the heart of the ancient Peruvian Andes, where knotted strings wove a web of communication across the mountains. Now, I'm guessing that for most of us here listening, the idea of tying a few knots in a string doesn't immediately send us running for the hills. In fact, when I was growing up, one of my favorite things to do was go out into the garden with some string or yarn and tie knots in it. And then I'd take my creations into the house and show them off to whoever would listen. It was a great way to pass the time. And also, sometimes I had to go quite creative trying to explain to my parents why they now had a purple bow tie or something like that. But for the ancient Peruvians, taking some string or yarn and tying knots into it was so much more than just a game or occupation for those stuck indoors. For them, the simple act of tying knots and strings was actually their primary means of record keeping. They'd make these incredible quipu, a type of knotted string that could be used to hold all kinds of information. The thing is, while we're still pretty good at reading these quips today, we don't know exactly how the ancient Peruvians did it. And that means there are a lot of myths, misconceptions, and conspiracy theories about how they managed to cram so much information into something as simple as a piece of string. In this episode of Bedtime History, we'll find out if the Inca really kept their entire financial records in a massive accounting quipu. We'll learn how European attempts to decipher the meaning of knotted strings led to the creation of elaborate fictional histories. And we'll see why, contrary to popular opinion, the Inca probably weren't storing photos of their enemies inside their quips. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, you won't survive this. Okay, let's begin. Today, we're going to talk about quips, which are made from strings or ropes or cords or whatever you want to call them. These were the primary way that the Inca and other pre-Columbian Andean cultures recorded information, whether it was numbers, history, or a grocery list. These quips were able to store vast amounts of data. And in fact, there's evidence that they held not just numerical information, but even photographs. Yep, you heard me right. Photographic information stored in strings. But how? How does a string work as a photo? Well, if you've ever played the game of telephone, you'll know how information can be transformed as it passes from person to person. The same was true of the quips. Each culture that handled these knotted strings added its own unique twist to the information being conveyed. And that's because there wasn't any writing system involved here. It was all done through knots. But those knots were able to convey huge amounts of information. And archaeologists believe that the Inca used them for census data, tax records, historical chronicles, and even a form of currency. That last part is especially interesting because there is evidence that Inca society maintained extensive trade networks all over South America. In fact, they even had a form of standardized weights and measures, which goes to show how advanced their society was. But obviously none of this stuff has survived, so it's hard to know for sure. The Inca Empire fell to the Spanish conquistadors in the early 16th century, and when they did, the Spanish friars tried to convert the Inca people to Christianity. Part of that process involved getting rid of anything that might threaten the new religion, and unfortunately that included most of the quips. However, a few pieces survived, mainly because they were hidden away by locals or taken back to Europe by the conquistadors, who often saw them as nothing more than strange souvenirs. It's these surviving quips that we're going to focus on today. But first, let's take a step back and look at how exactly these quips worked. If you look closely at one of these surviving examples, you can see just how incredibly intricate they are. There are thousands of knots and just a few feet of cord, and each knot represents a piece of information. Now, it's important to remember that there's no standard system for deciphering these quips, but scholars believe that each color of cord represented something different. There were also different types of knots, and these could represent different values. For example, one type of knot could represent a number between 1 and 9, depending on where it was tied along the string. Another type of knot could represent a number between 10 and 90, and yet another could represent numbers in the hundreds. By combining different colored strings and different types of knots, the Inca were able to keep track of huge amounts of data. What makes these quips so fascinating is that they're still being deciphered today. The problem is that no one knows exactly how to read them. There are a lot of guesses, but without any surviving documentation from the Inca, it's impossible to be sure. This has led to a lot of misinformation about quips over the years. For example, some people believe that they were used as a form of encryption, but there's no evidence to support this claim. Others believe that the Inca used quips to communicate with extraterrestrials, but let's just say that's a bit far-fetched. The truth is that we don't know how the Inca used quips because, like I said, we don't have any surviving documentation. But that hasn't stopped people from trying to figure it out. One of the most popular theories about how to read quips was proposed by a man named Felix C. Reserve in 1941. According to his theory, each color of string represented a different number. For example, a red string could represent the number 1, a blue string could represent the number 2, and so on. He also believed that the type of knot used could either increase or decrease the value of the number. So by combining different colored strings and different types of knots, you could get a wide range of numbers. Now, this theory makes a lot of sense, but it's based entirely on speculation. There's no evidence to support it, but it's the best theory we have so far. In recent years, scientists have turned to technology in order to help them decipher the secrets of the quips. One team of researchers developed a computer program that simulates the process of tying and untying knots. They then tested the program with a series of quips, and it was able to correctly identify the type of knot used in each case. The program was also able to identify the color of each string, which is another piece of the puzzle. Scientists hope that by using technology like this, they'll be able to unlock the secrets of the quips once and for all. But until then, we'll just have to wait and see what new discoveries are made. When the Spanish arrived in Peru, they were quick to take advantage of the Inca's lack of a written language. They knew that this would make it difficult for the Inca to mount any kind of defense against them, and they were right. The Inca were no match for the Spanish conquistadors, and soon the empire was in ruins. But the Spanish weren't just interested in conquering the Inca, they were also interested in exploiting their resources. And that meant taking an interest in these mysterious quips. One of the first Europeans to study quips was a man named Francisco de Viedma Wallacea, who was a member of the Spanish expedition that conquered Peru. He wrote about quips in a letter to King Charles V of Spain in 1535, and he claimed that the Inca used them to keep track of their taxes. Other Europeans who came after him were equally fascinated by these mysterious objects, and they took quips back to Europe with them as souvenirs. But no one really knew what to make of them. It wasn't until the 18th century that anyone really tried to decipher the meaning of the quips. The first person to do so was a man named Johann Gottlob Thea, who was a German physician and amateur archaeologist. He published his findings in a book called Observations Eumepis, and he claimed that the quips were used as a form of encryption. His theory was that each color of string represented a different letter of the alphabet, and by tying knots in the string, you could encrypt messages. Now, this theory was highly controversial, and most scholars rejected it outright. After all, there was no evidence to support it, but that didn't stop Thea from trying to prove his point. He continued to study quips throughout his life, and he even traveled to Peru in order to collect more samples. But he never did manage to prove his theory, and ultimately it was rejected by the majority of the academic community. However, Thea's work did inspire others to take an interest in quips. And in the 19th century, A French scholar named Augustus de Tassi came up with his own theory about how to read quips. According to Tassi, each type of knot represented a different number, and by counting the number of knots, you could get a numerical value. He then compared this value to the value of Roman numerals, and he claimed that the quips were basically a form of Roman numerals. Now, this theory was also highly controversial, but it did gain some traction among scholars, and it's still being debated today. And that brings us to the present day. We still don't know exactly how to read these mysterious quips, but we're getting closer all the time. Thanks to modern technology, we're able to analyze quips in ways that were never possible before. And who knows what new discoveries await us. Maybe one day we'll be able to unlock the secrets of the Inca once and for all. For now, though, we're left with more questions than answers. How exactly did the Inca use quips? What was their system for recording information? And what did the Inca think when they looked at their quips? Unfortunately, we may never know the answers to these questions, but we can appreciate the mystery. The Inca created a unique and fascinating way of keeping records, and their legacy lives on in the quips. Even today, centuries after the fall of the Inca Empire, these knotted strings continue to fascinate and intrigue us. They're a reminder of a lost civilization and a testament to the ingenuity of the Inca people. Thank you for joining me on this journey to the heart of the ancient Peruvian Andes. I hope you enjoyed learning about the Inca and their mysterious quips. Before we go, I'd like to ask you to please remember to support this channel. It's the best way to help me keep making videos like this one. And if you've enjoyed this video, I'd also like to recommend a few others that you might enjoy. Thank you again for watching. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Bedtime History. Sweet dreams.